time. Take your time.
Texting my administration.
The weekend went great. I'm currently judging great rounds. I'm filling my roles in next week.
I'll never do this without well.
Oh god.
You gotta tell them how they're doing.
Yep.
Hey, I've been trying to stand up the past 2 rounds. It's pretty liberating.
Dude, you just gotta sit down. You have
First
more
time
control
since working
over
at
the
TSC
flow.
job, so
I'll
it's
fall
pretty
asleep. Alright,
Let's get start.
so we're ready?
Yep.
Yes.
Real slow on tags and auto names.
I'm
Gotcha.
sure you go slow on everything. As far as
Yeah, I agree with that. But
First, the purpose of debate education should be to train youth to challenge oppressive structures, not perpetuate them. Boomer. A focus on micro-level processes is fruitful only after we address the concept of institutional oppression. Exposure to the concept of oppression helps students gain a greater understanding and appreciate those who are different from themselves. Such concepts are also lead students to raise questions in other courses, apply their knowledge to interact with members of other groups. And focusing on any other form of oppression re-entrenches the cisgender norms, means others solving roads of oppression are doomed to fail since they've started from an oppressive mindset. Green 2. When we are minimally inclusive of transgender people and related issues in our curricula, our work perpetuates systemic cisgender privilege and ignores powerful opportunity to advocate for community that faces vertically cruel discrimination. Examples of this minimum inclusion include women should not be trans inclusive in our educational work. To clarify, my argument is not that this is the worst form of oppression, but rather that this discourse should occur. Second, the increasing violence and oppression faced by individuals calls for a shift in the material conditions experienced by these individuals. Rogers. The brutal death of 36-year-old transgender woman is well into the latest in what activists are calling an alarming rise of transgender violence. Stemming was run over several times, making the 17th transgender person reported killed this year. The Kansas City Anti-Violence Project has characterized her death as an intentional act meant to send a message to those just the killings reported. The killings reflect an ongoing state of crisis for the community. It means abstract alternatives fail. They need to provide a concrete way of providing material change, not just mindset shifts, having some minute effects on material conditions. Means if they don't have an alternate method, the act is the only one with risk of offense under the rule of ballot. Therefore, the role of ballot is vote for the better best possibly alters the material conditions of marginalized groups. This requires state action, not just critical reflection. Moving away from the state doomed to left critiques of failure, we must work within the state without being states. Means if neg alt isn't a state policy, I'm the only one with risk of offense. Connolly. It is less the state, more subsidies. You reduce left to pure critique, no possibilities of strategies. Critique is always important, never enough. Almost knowledge, bureaucracies, and corruption. They will get worse unless eco-guidance enter the fray at anything levels of politics, microeconomic experience, and state. No agenda left can see far without finding expression in state policy. We seek to include state without becoming states. To clarify, the app is not conforming anyone to a gender binary of woman or man, but rather transgender individuals should have the societal option to choose sex, even that choice being devoid of sex itself. Also, the app recognizes the plurality of identities encompass one individual, that those identities can be individually oppressed. Also, engagement with the state is not synonymous with endorsement of state norms. Rather, the pragmatic policy approach to the app can be utilized with other ideologies. Part 1 is the plan. Resolved. U.S. states alter existing child welfare laws to give the adolescent, transgender people in foster homes the right to obtain hormonal treatment in the form of puberty blockers. Turner, the Solvency advocate, clarifies. States adopt child welfare laws saying that hormone therapy is medically necessary for gender identity creativity and that such medical will provide the agency's expense not covered by Medicaid. Adopting the proposed legislation will affirm the state's commitment to that duty, ensuring that transgender foster care youth receive the medical care they need at the appropriate time. She furthers, codifying that duty with respect to transgender-related medical care for transgender youth and foster care is a necessary step toward affirming basic human rights for these youth. She furthers again, establishing that states who provide such medical care should dramatically increase access to appropriate medical care for transgender youth. More advocacies need to bring about change to the general population's attitude towards transgender individuals, which will lead to better treatment of these individuals. She furthers, finally, in the first stage, medications administered to suppress the production of hormones produced by the adolescent's biological sex. 4 implications. A. Functions as terminal defense on all potential net counterplans in case waiting for the 18 to function through some of the medium, shift the economic burden of the transgender individual, which just creates another insurmountable hurdle that needs to be passed before getting access to medical care. B. Shows the plan shifts the current values of the state medical community towards that commitment to transgender care through an understanding of the transgender narrative. C. The hormones aren't used to fit into a cis normative conception of male or female. They can be using the hormones to deny sex itself. D. The decision is entirely up to the transgender individual. The state isn't imposing puberty blockers on them. Also, to clarify, my conception of autonomy is that transgender youth get the final say in their medical treatment. Part 2 is the harms. First, transgender youth face horrible bullying in the school system. Shield. Almost 2/3 of LGBT youth reported being harassed in school the previous year. 46% reported being verbally harassed because of their gender expression. 26% reported being physically harassed. Over a quarter of her teacher staff make negative comments about the student's gender expression. They are 5 times more likely than their heterosexual peers to miss school due to the fear of their own personal safety. School administrators often fail to acknowledge the students' gender identity by refusing to issue them the appropriate identification or allowing them to access appropriate facilities. Means transgender youth face total social exclusion, so allowing this issue is a precondition ain't productive change. Second, without medical care and foster homes, transgender youth turn to sex work, which results in rape, murder, and incarceration. Not only do they turn to sex work, but they also perform their own medical treatment, which can result in self-performed genital mutilation. Turner 2. Transgender youth and foster care deprived of gender-affirming medical treatment often used to live on the state and foster care. Once on the street, these youth often relegate themselves to sex work, increasing exposure to HIV, murder, and incarceration. In addition, homelessness, incomplete education, lack of socially legitimate work experience predispose these youth to employment and housing discriminations. Adults deny transgender youth medical care often leads them sorting in self-treatment. This comes in the form of genital mutilation or self-medicating. 4 impacts. A. Outweighs the negative offense on magnitude, giving adolescents access to medical care, avoids gender mutilation and murder. B. Shows the necessity of the medical community. Even if it's not perfect, it's definitely better than the harms of the app. C. C, there's an infant at disadvantage wanes and force the youth to undergo an extremely unwanted physical change that results in suicidal tendencies. D, offense outweighs potential negative impacts because the F is immediate solvency. Part 3 is the solvency. First, access to medical treatment solves for transgender depression. Key to a sense of agency. Carol. Depression, anxiety, and suicidality among transgender people are commonly tied to an unmet need for gender-affirming medical treatment. Denying access to hormones represents the futile recognize the humanity of trans people. Self-treatment is shown to alleviate depression, reducing the risk of suicide in transgender youth. The opportunity to take hormones can facilitate gender self-determination, validating transgender youth assertions of gender identities. Exerting that control can provide transgender youth with a sense of agency, reducing feelings of helplessness and despair. 2 implications. A, functions prior to neg arguments by denying the right to medical treatment. The negative halts any potential advancement of transgender rights by denying the existence of human nature. B, shift the emphasis away from the squirrel medical community by recognizing the autonomy and humanity of trans adolescents. Second, access to medical treatment solves for discrimination and bullying faced by transgender youth. Turner 3. The unavailability of gender-affirming medical treatment is a social consequence of transgender youth. Youth continue to face discrimination which may contribute to depression. Many transgender youth avoid developing relationships until after their transition, cause them to become more isolated. Underview. First, accept one-hour theory and meta-theory, since one-hour theory and meta-theory are necessary to check back abusive positions in the one end, otherwise the negative could be infinitely abusive. Second, AF gets RVIs because A, times Q makes it impossible in both theory and substance. The F requires a link to the ballot via theory. B, neg access to grounds means the neg has one road to the ballot. The F requires one as well. C, nature of competing interprets means who can set the most fair education norm for the beta. If I win offense defense on theory that proves my norm is not practical, so I win under competing interprets. Also in 2 RVIs to the like collapse wrong scripts I couldn't predict in the 1 AR that strats Q. Third, discussions cannot be based on ideal theory. We must engage in policy discussions. Those discussions mean nothing unless they are change values of the people they affect. Curry, despite pronouncing the debates and activity of intellectual exercise pointing to real-world consequences, many of the discussions are fixed to a paradigm which seeks the adjudication of material disparities. The consequence of one ideal theory over another. The gap between what is in the real world is represented by theories in politics. The debaters threatens any real discussion about the concrete nature of oppression. That's card at concrete nature of oppression.
Okay. Where is that? Alright.
I gotcha.
No, you're fine. Okay. Ready? So what comes first, the fairness arguments that you impact to in the underview or the role of the ballot?
The fairness arguments that impact you?
Yeah, at the underview you say allow 1AR theory. If you were to read that, what would come first, the role of the ballot or the
I would say
theory?
I have no I don't know what the theory shell is, so it depends if it impacts
Well, I
a
want you to
political
specify
practice.
based on the warrants provided in the AC.
I cannot though, because it's not contextual enough, right? So 1AR theory.
Isn't that a reason why your spikes would be bad? Not that you can't prioritize what they would look like if extended.
No, that's not how
That's
spikes
fine.
work.
Sure.
So the
Maybe
argument
that's
is that
not
I don't know
how
what
it
theory
works.
shell I'm
Okay.
running, so I can't say
Sure.
if it comes
That's
before
fine.
K.
So you say we have to have a very narrow dialogue on your role of the ballot. You just say talk about any marginalized body though, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then we don't only have to talk about trans adolescents.
No.
Okay.
There's weighing arguments why that would be an educational practice, but it's not that the role of the ballot is specific to trans adolescents.
Wait, so then if I get up in the next speech and talk about other marginalized bodies, you can extend this as a reason why. I mean, you cite harms to talking about other groups, right? So then is that a reason why we should only
The
talk
harm
about
section
trans
in the plan
adolescents?
text is specific
No,
to
not the
trans
harm
adolescents.
section of the plan text.
Oh, okay.
At the top of the AC, maybe under Boehmer.
Boehmer's no. Boehmer is specific to all forms
Yeah,
of oppression.
so focusing on any other form of oppression re-entrenches the cisgender norm.
Yes.
So for instance, if I talk about racism, that
Mhm.
re-entrenches the oppression of the trans body.
So long as you it's not necessarily if you talk about another form of oppression that's bad. If you are
Wait,
silent on
well,
this form of oppression, that's
what
bad.
else would I do in a debate round to focus on it? Obviously I have to talk about it, right?
Yeah, if you talk
So,
about this form of
and
oppression.
that would re-entrench the cisgender norm.
What?
Never mind. Okay. So what should I
Okay.
do? And you say policy making is key under your role of the ballot, right?
Yeah, that's under Connolly.
Why?
So Connolly says if we do not have a state implementable policy, then we're just going to be reduced to pure critique. We will not actually have solutions to oppression, but rather we will just keep critiquing the way in which we apply solutions to oppression.
Wait, if
which
it's a
results in
question
any
of like
resistance.
performatively and methodologically challenging oppression, what do you mean by real? We're not like passing legislation right
I
now.
understand that, but Boehmer, there's 2 implications. Boehmer says specifically that our education needs to be applicable to the real world. It's how we actually deal with these policies. So even
Sure.
in the debate sense,
Yeah, if
even
you
in the
talk
debate
about
sense,
if you talk about like power relations in the real world, how is that not relevant? Just because it's not in the form of a piece of legislation means it's irrelevant?
No, it's not that you can't talk about power
Wait, but your
structures in the
evidence
real world.
literally
It's what
says
your
exposure
alternative-
to the concept of oppression helps students. Where does
Yes.
it talk about policy making?
Connolly is the one that talks about policymaking. It says that the form of exposure we should be having is a policy-oriented discourse because that is the most pertinent form of a way in which we should phrase alternatives.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start prep. Can you explain the D-sub point under Turner 2?
Turner 2. Yeah. So F has immediate solvency, so that way it outweighs neg K impacts. For instance, if you write a cap K that would tear down the whole system, that's probably going to take a very long time to implement. So the F offense would outweigh since it has immediate solvency.
Solvency in what form? Like the judges will go do it right now?
Nope. Turner 2, Carroll, and Turner 3.
Okay, I have 58 seconds left. Do you need everything to be shocked?
Yeah.
Alright. I'm just gonna put everything I can read in here.
Could read?
I mean, most likely we'll get to all of them.
Alright. Just put it in order.
Yep.
That's about right.
Your career is done. Sorry.
Go back and finish your project. That's your prep for the next term. Way better. You should get collar mics.
Yeah, no, that's what one of my students is saying.
And also have them wear GoPros. And you need to edit the videos.
Do you need case answers too?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't need them, but I prefer them.
I feel you.
I just need to. We need a whole camera crew that's like.
Probably not gonna read the thing at the bottom, but I might like use parts of it.
Okay.
So just like I kept it at the bottom of the doc for that reason. Case answers. Alright. C around Porter Valley.
Here he exists after the order. It's a funny process. That would be awesome.
Thank you.
He is man enough to be. Yeah, little marker thing, you know, you draw. Oh, that'd be awesome. Especially if you did the GoPro thing, so you could circle things on the flow with like a marker. He's gonna extend this side.
Alright, I'm ready whenever you guys are.
How many offs are there?
2 off AC. Okay. Ready?
Yep.
Part A is the representation analysis. The judge is an educator. They must endorse representation. The best challenge impression, Vincent. Gaming debate allows our speech to be disconnected from the performance. Not what you say, but justified. For those who preach, they are never forced to have their performance attached to the way they justify what is deemed logical. Debaters and sort of performance when they make arguments they don't believe but think is the best strategy. This is false. The best strategy should never justify racism. 1. You're committed to representation behind your action. Understanding yourself is taking the action prescribed by your framework. You must understand that your will is capable of being determined by the prescription or anything otherwise incoherent. And some external thing would dictate your action. But then all frameworks are incoherent and external thing that influence you can nullify any prescription or framework provided. This understanding entails that you are tied to your representation since you represent yourself as causality. Rodel. The moral law determines the will independently of any inclination. Being determined by the moral law, the will is determined only by the representation of course of action. The moral law is its causality. Being conscious of the moral law, I know that I have the power to act according to it. I know that my will is capable of being determined by it alone. The consciousness of moral law provides me with a priori knowledge. I know that I'm the kind of thing to exemplify the causality of moral law. I recognize the metaphysical possibility of law and the causality is being conscious of law because my consciousness of law reveals its actuality in me. 2. Objective realities don't exist absent framings. The ethical framing that allows for repugnancy is not objective, but the product of fallacious assumptions that can be invalidated by changing frame. Jerd. Representation are interpretive processes through which decision makers make sense of reality, assign subjective value to others, and determine what's significant. Politics are subjective ways of seeing the world. Representation limit the course of action. They're politically thinkable. The way in which one interprets the other delays the course of action one will adopt in order to deal with the other. Reject the absent representation. Adolescence cannot be a relevant moral category. Cultural difference make the idea incoherent and supplied arbitrary to females in a totalizing manner. Degner. Adolescence varies considerably across cultures. The individual Western culture defines adolescence time from puberty to age 18 or 21, but non-Western culture tend to mark the beginning of adulthood with the rites of passage to mark the acceptance into adult society. Experience and physical maturation not the same for all teens. Americans expect adolescents to achieve independence in an individual culture. These are not desired in all cultures. For example, some cultures are collectivistic in nature. Elderly mature girls are treated so they are older, requiring them to act as old as they appear. Such expectations overlook more age-appropriate socio-emotional development and needs. Part B is the alternative. The alternative is to direct the AC and use conscientization. This is a deep interrogation of the structure present in society. We start by amending the flawed representation of the affirmative. This means that permutations are incoherent. Since conscientization starts to deconstructing the affirmative, we cannot use part of what we deconstruct as that will taint the representation we are employing. Slater et al. Critical understanding refers to deep examination of social order. This starts in the ones reality and identifies oppression to local and societal levels, accounting for the needs of various social groups. Critical understanding entails unveiling myths created by oppressors. This starts when people decode the reality in a systematic way. Decoding refers to decrypting a situation in terms of particular conditions that people perceive, as well as the social structure shape those conditions. People should be able to question how to transform conditions toward their real liberation. Controls the strongest link under his role about because he says that we have to understand the underlying power structures that inherently inform us. I'm saying that we have to decode the things at the local and societal levels rather than trying to get mired in political type of legislation. Next off is the topicality shell. A is the interpretation. The affirmative must defend that adolescents ought to have the right to autonomous medical choices in its entirety. To clarify, affirmatives cannot defend a parametricized adequacy that isolates a particular meta choice or category of adolescence. B is the violation. He reads a plan text. C stands 1. This is bracketed for specificity. 1 is textuality. The resolution states medical choice rather than a medical choice. The bare plural construction with lack of determinants until you can only affirm by defending all medical choice rather than one you arbitrarily choose. Nebel. Medical choice is plural phrase, so it refers to more than one choice. Somewhere include articles like the demonstrative, like these, possessive, like Meyer, quantifiers, like some. These are determinants. Bare plurals lack. There's nothing in front of the noun to tell you which medical choices are being discussed. A's point is every clause of resolution must be kind of because otherwise when you could arbitrarily ignore clause produce a skewed interpretation. 2 and account of what the resolution means is greater explanatory power just in the accounts for more relevant facts. B suppose outweighs since identifies what the grammatically correct interpretation of the resolution is rather than interpretation assumed to be correct because it seems more fair educational. And facts of usage constrain the interpretation. The English language denies the view of the resolution you uphold. Nebel 2. No competent speaker of English would endorse an inference plan involving 2 medical choices. The resolution. Suppose Sally believes U.S. and Canada should require a living wage, but no other government. She would not assert just governments ought to require a living wage. She would deny this and hold U.S. and Canada are exceptions. This is good evidence because speakers have an implicit mastery of the language in which the resolution is stated. The resolution is in English, not some debate-specific English. Facts of usage constrain the interpretation. 2 is ground. Regardless of disclosure, without the interpretation, absence specify a hyper-specific medical choice that leaves horrible ground for the negative. His abs the clearest example. Disadvantage garnered from the resolution are either completely eliminated or severely mitigated. Horrible form of obscuration to justify choosing affirms and negatives are incapable of contesting substantively, and the interrupts 100% of any offense you could try to claim. You could have run a topical version of the affirmative that still had specific offense. It's called reading whole resolution and then just having specific types of contentions. D is the voter. What fairness because it is conscious and must be constrained by rules in order to have the punishment for an object around fairness frames committing interpretations because it frames with substance
some concepts are relevant, and maximizing the judgment substance necessary for a defense theory is not sufficient to answer instead of this lower portion of time running shell, and there's still a risk of offense, and no reason building on topicality. Absent comparing each side's arguments, the judge will only be able to make a decision based on their familiarity with the topic. Horrible debate, since this is different for each drop debater on topicality. A point is false interpretation to be voted on, so they're not disseminated. The purpose of topicality is to promote the best interpretation of the solution. B point time spent reading the interpretation means the rest around is skewed. Trying to go back to another layer is misled and can't be properly evaluated. Debaters have departed from strategy in which that layer existed without theory. Even if you can't argue for it, the round has become too different to go back to the issue, including the role of the ballot. C point is even if you drop the argument, the affluence is the argument that he says you should drop is the abscess. Incoherent is everyone's abscess, and is assumed to be what grounds the entirety of one's position. Doing away with this is getting rid of the most basic feature of affirming, meaning you lose. No RVI's. A point is proving that your interpretation is correct when it doesn't tell you win. You have the burden regardless of me reading the shell. Difference is that in this case I actually pressed you on the issue. B points RVI's incentivize intentionally non-topical interpretations. The F can just prepare a robust defense of the interpretation to win off when theory is read. AC. Go to the green analysis. He says focusing on any other form of oppression is bad. He says his role of value is just talking about any type of marginalized individual. Do not let him try to use this as weighing in the next speech, because this is incoherent. 1, 2, you bite into the bite into the cake that you explicitly say is most important, because you try to conceive of every other form of oppression, and specifically in terms of the trans lens, which means that you necessarily exclude the type of particular type of features of other groups that are necessary to realize and try to combat their forms of oppression. For instance, if we're trying to understand racism, we shouldn't solely apply a trans lens, because that is obviously not going to focus on all of their individual features, which means to say linking harder into your critique. Then you say abstract case failed too. You never define your conception of abstraction. You just say policy making. I'll get to that in a second, but the abstraction is only when we're not actually solving the issue. If it's a question of methodologically and performatively trying to change the structures that you say are most important for marginalized groups, and that's a question of why we should actually understand the power relations or the representation before actually informing the policy debate, which means it's a prerequisite to understanding the policy type of education that you explicitly think is the most important. Now go to his role about you. Point to your policy. Connolly evidence is policy making. First, do not use policy making. 1, this is extremely misled. You're going to be mired in types of political legislation, whether it will go through the Senate, House, or the President, whether the President will actually veto it. If you do not talk about those types of things, then you're obviously not being a consistent policymaker, because you're not understanding all the different facets of what it means to be a policymaker, which means that you have to look at representations too. There are inherent racist assumptions in the state. If we want to depart from that, whether we should try to do what is most germane to the debate round, understand the actual relations underlying the things we try to go for. 3, I am still consistent with it, because I crossed by the argument I made before. The representations frame the policy we were talking about. 4, if we care about policymaking, you obviously have to look to topicality, since obviously policymakers want to determine the meaning of what they are talking about, since a comma could completely change a piece of legislation. Then you try to make a lot of arguments as to why you are preconditioned to dialogue about any other issue. Overview to every single one of these arguments. Literally, he's just power tagging all of them. You are not a precondition to dialogue. Rather, these are just arguments as to implications for your cards, but rather hold them to the text of what the warrants actually say. Rather, my argument is actually a prerequisite, because I consider the representations that frame every single one of the impacts that you try to go for. Now go to the underview. You say 1AR theory. Do not allow them to use this in the next speech. 1AR theory is incoherent, because you can just try to restart the debate and avoid the type of engagement that you specifically think is relevant. Drop him if he tries to do this. That's an independent reason. Now, overviewing the entirety of the theory debate. For negative interpretations and presume negative 1, you get the last speech, which is especially key on K in theory debates, because it is more persuasive leeway. 2, you also get the first speech, which means you can texture the entirety of the debate. If it means if I concede any type of damning arguments, I definitely should lose. 3 is diversification of arguments. The fact that you get 3 speeches means that you can put a greater amount of spin and try to garner new implications that I can't, because I'm a negative. Also, the fact that I have no 3 and R. You also say ideal theory is bad. You cannot apply that to my alternative, since -1 is that inherently links to your role of value better than you do.
Alright.
Yeah.
Okay, conditional or unconditional?
Unconditional.
Which comes first, T or K?
Role of the judge.
So K.
That's how you want to conceive of it.
Alright, that scares me here. Does T or K come first?
Well, it shouldn't scare you, right? What
does
is
T
it?
or K come first? Stop. Just T or K come first.
K.
K comes first.
But here's the thing, right? When debaters ask questions for one-sentence answers, it's obviously sort of problematic, because they say a lot of words.
Yeah,
one word's not going to help you that much, right?
Skirt the question and just start talking.
I'll say the K comes first, if that's the answer you want,
Gotcha.
right?
Alright, what is the K alternative?
So, let's go there now. The alternative is to reject the AC and use conscientization. And that just means it's a deep interrogation of sort of the representations and the power structures informing the AC. It says we have to understand it on local and societal levels.
Does T have an implication to the role of the ballot?
It does. I would argue so.
Okay, so does T come first then? Underneath the role of the
I say
ballot?
the K comes first. I mean,
Okay,
are you
cool.
trying to
Just
have
making
T come first?
No, I'm just making sure you're not going to do some weird stuff in the 2 end. Alright, so why are perms
weighing
impossible?
is always possible. What?
Why are perms impossible?
Sure. So, perms are incoherent. This is an argument about representations. Obviously, I do not want to endorse the flawed representation of the affirmative. My argument is we need a departure from that and rather endorse a good one that completely is separate from whatever you're talking about. Right?
Okay, how is this okay, so this isn't a pick then?
No, not at all.
Alright, making sure. So how's this completely different than the affirmative?
You say we critique.
Oh,
it.
so
Why can't
yeah,
we critique
so
it?
of course, so you talk about, you say the USFG will do something regarding adolescence. Obviously, the conception of adolescence that the USFG thinks about is their own. I say that's an inherently racist, oppressive, and totalizing one. That A marginalizes women in addition to other oppressive groups, and it doesn't understand the specific features of other conceptions of adolescence, right? Because you only focus on the one apparently relevant to the Western notion that you think about.
Analysis?
Sure. So Brodel and Jerd are two different warrants for representations. I presume you want the Rodel warrant.
No, I don't want either warrant.
Alright.
So, why is adolescence uniquely bad? Because it imposes a.
Well, it's not that adolescence,
Is it
like
discursive?
what?
Is it a discursive link?
I don't know what that means.
What is the link in the app?
Just by saying the word adolescence, you do not link into the.
And what is the link?
Sure. So it's the conception of adolescence you defend. Point to the plan text. The USFG will do X, Y, Z in relation to adolescence, or whatever the plan text is. The fact that you defend a Western notion of adolescence and exclude other types that are inherently relevant.
Does that mean it's their conception of adolescence?
So in the entirety of the AC, that is the one that you defend, right? Various features of your evidence
Why?
show
Just
that,
because
right?
they
You don't.
implement the
Well,
policy,
sure.
do I defend that conception?
Well, here's why. The entirety of the AC says provide it to these adolescents, or those you think are 14 to 18 or something. I'm saying that is not the view of adolescence that we should have. So it's not like discursive or that you can get out of the link, right?
How's the alt solve?
So I say that we started deconstructing the app. We can't use part of we construct, so we have a new representation that excludes the flawed and bad things that yours has. It's a question of representation, solves 100%, right?
Sorry, say that one more time.
If it's a question of representations, it will solve.
I'm saying what is the solvency again, sorry.
Oh, yeah, so it says that we started deconstructing the app. I sort of exclude the representation that you're talking about because it is a bad one, and rather endorse one that is more inclusive and understands the different features that unite various like excluded groups, right?
So unite excluded groups? That's it.
No, dude. So I think you're like trying to find like 3 words that summarize my alternative, but the fact that it's alternative entails that it's a lot more nuanced than what you're trying to boil it down to. There are obviously various features of it, right? Everything I said is a reason why my alternative is a good one. But it's not like just exclude groups or just whatever else you try to assert that it is.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry I've asked this like 9 times, but every single time I've not been listening. What's the alternative? Come on.
Do you want me to
I'm
just
trying
read
my
it?
best. No. Seriously, I'm listening this time. I apologize.
Okay,
That was me.
so it's a deep interrogation of the structures present in society. Okay?
Okay. The alternative said we need to decode reality in a systemic way. How do you do it in a systemic way?
So, it says that just not just going to be one fell swoop. We entirely decode reality. Rather, you have to do it in certain
Where
steps,
do you decode
right?
systemic impacts?
Well, it's not systemic impacts. If I do it in a systemic way or one like methodologically, right? I
Why is
first
systemic
isolate.
equate to methodological?
So systemic just means I'm like going in certain. There's a certain pathway to doing it, right? I'm starting on that pathway and saying first the prerequisite to fully doing it is understanding the representations that underlie whatever action you choose to do.
Alright, 50 seconds remaining. Here, let me flash it.
That's not the camera. I'm just completely,
Okay, you still were on the camera doing that.
completely ignore that. That was completely intentional.
Watching for them.
Yes, I am.
Who said you didn't have to use prep for that?
Oh, I just well, we didn't do it for his prep, so I just assumed for mine.
Alright, but from now on after this one,
Really? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wait,
No, no, it's fine.
okay, all right. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it should kind of be part of prep. Rounds go way too long.
Yeah, it's true.
That's what I do sometimes.
Yeah, I know what you would
All right,
do.
1 AR
You'd be like,
quarters.
when I was trying to organize all this as one huge document, it'd take forever, so.
We never flashed anything, so I never did that.
1 AR quarters?
Sometimes like kids actually needed a prep, but make it with a prep, so that's kind of fair. And it's always shorter than it would be otherwise.
Isn't that rush? They take their good time.
Yeah.
It's not prep.
The-
Also,
Here, you might want to scroll down. I'm actually going to start with the off. I gave you extensions out of the app, but you hear what I'm saying, Nalin?
You're starting on off.
Yeah, so you might want to scroll down just a little bit. You'll see. It says new off and big tag above it. All right.
Okay, one sec.
It's like if you did expand, that was what you do. Like, all right, just on the top or
Yeah, no way.
Wait, how many new offs are there?
It's just one new off. So it's going to go new off ACK.
Is the new off a counter code for this show or something direct?
Completely new. Yeah.
So what are you doing?
New off ACK.
Yep.
Cool. Let me know when everyone's ready.
Worked really hard on that.
Everybody good? Cool. All right. Big mistake at the last speech when he can see K comes first. This means if I function my offense on representative layer, I'm definitely going to be outweighing. Now new off. They assume that grammar is universal and that there's only proper grammar. This excludes people who are based merely on how they speak in relation to what is deemed normal. Naomi. It is impossible to endorse the claim of correctness without domination. Nebel differentiates that as what's competent English, whereas other dialects are simply different, uncomparable dialects. Our feminine voice, less competent speakers of English are those who have read words books but never heard them pronounced due to lack of high grade proper school education. Less competent. What about those who speak in accents? I am proud to be incompetent speaker. No way will I designate any students worse or failing standard, dependent on a single way of interpreting how to speak, think, or think about the world. The only impact semantic difference is that the rules are rules. He is disconnected from theory and history, violence, that's correctness, that language brace. This functions on a representative layer. I'm saying the entire theory show you read in the last speech is bad. This outweighs the representation in the affirmative. At best, it's the link of omission because I didn't challenge the assumption under adolescence, but this is the link of actual what you did in your last speech, specifically that there's two separate links in the theory show. One, you say that there's no competent English speaker that wouldn't do this under Nebel, and also your B argument, which is your specific words, say it outweighs on grammar correctness. That ideology of correctness is uniquely bad. Now, don't let them say they can. Don't let them get out of this with saying the resolution was written in standard English. This supercharged the links that they're perpetuating debate as white for whites activity. Things like AVVE are not just wrong English, they're dialects of English. Pull them. There's a difference between incorrect utterance of one language and correct utterance of another. When a French speaker refers to capital UK as Lawrence, it's not a mistake. That's correct English, French name of the London. The same is true when we're speaking closely about related English. Some speakers use the word whom instead of what comes in some context and may use it after the verb. This means that there are other dialects we could be using. Now go to the app. First, extend green 2 analysis. That discussing non-transgender depression turns case into just perpetuates oppressive practices. This is going to be very damning because your arguments against this are very bad. The first argument is that it isn't coherent, but you're not actually following the warrants in the card. Definitely is coherent. If we don't function from starting point of transgender oppression, that means we're going to re-entrench cisgender mindset, which you're dropping the implication that this means other roads to solving oppression are doomed to fail. The second argument is that this is oppressive to non-trans people. It excludes racist impacts. No, it definitely doesn't. You just have to start from a framing mindset of transgender oppression, or at best, at least just relate your impact to transgender oppression, or just turn the app or do something talking about these groups. Otherwise, you're just silencing them. This is not a link of omission because in the last speech specifically, he only talked about adolescent impacts, which didn't even relate them back to transgender impacts. He just did it generally. Very damning because that's a conceit framing issue. Now let's go to the harms. Extend the Turner B subpoint return. No links from your K. The plan is a shift in current medical community and state values. This is going to no link from your plan because I'm saying specifically this definition of adolescence was constructed by Western conceptions of adolescence. That's implicit in your link analysis. This is analytic B under Turner. It's no linking from the K. In your specific link analysis, you said the link is that because I defend state conception of adolescence, because the Western state is doing it, the USFG or whatever. I'm saying I'm shifting away from that state state norm. This was cold conceded at the last speech. Then you can extend the Carroll analysis, access to hormonal change, social transgender depression, extend the analytic under Turner, function part of neg arguments. They halt any possible solution to transgender depression by denying the existence of their human nature. This means none of his offense can link back to the role of the bad because he's not even recognizing their human nature. This means Ruse the Solvency at best under the alternative because he's not actually recognizing the humanity of these groups. Now extend Curry. We need a union of critique and rebuttal action in order to actually discuss solutions of oppression. His only argument is that I link to your role of the bad, but you're not doing any analysis under the Curry analysis. This is independent from Connolly. This means because you do not have a real world solution, something that can be applied to the real world, that's going to be very damning because it's not actually, it's going to be pure critique without any possible strategies of solution. It's divorcing away from real world consequences. This turns your critique because you're abstracting away from the actual concepts that are applying to these groups. You're not dealing with concrete forms of the solution. You're just dealing with, in the abstract, our representations are uniquely bad. Now, go to the K proper. First, under the K link, one, no link. I don't defend the Western conception of adolescence. No in the app viewpoint, specifically I do that. And I show I shift away from the status quo medical community. Second, no link. Adolescence quo is bad. I shift away from this quo when I say the harms of the portion of this quo, and I recognize gender identity as a fluid concept. This shifts away from the developmental. Do not use this developmental adolescent, i.e., where it constructs females as more mature because there's a gender, there's a fluid conception of adolescence. Now go to the alternative. First, the absent instance, the alternative. I investigate power structures and critiquing the squo in the harm section. Second, only I decode systemic impact because I show how the current societal structure is bad versus you're just showing the representation of the AC are bad. And third, links of omission should be dropped on face because there's an infinite number of cases that I can link into. This is definitely a link of omission. It's just that I don't critique adolescence.
Okay. You still say policymaking comes first, right? That's the reason why my
Nope.
rebuttal goes away.
Nope, it's not policymaking, it's Curry. Didn't extend Connolly, it's independent.
So policymaking doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. So that T argument that you made on Connolly goes away too.
Okay. Okay.
You reading anything new?
Yes.
Can you flash it to me?
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
What's the order?
It's going to be overview starting in the topicality shell, then specifically the arguments you read against it, then my representation critique, and then AC approach.
Sorry, can you repeat all that?
Overview T shell, then your answer, reps K. I'll signpost from there.
Overview. Okay.
Overview. Yeah, overview and T.
Is it which shell?
I'm
should
good.
we fill that on?
You should, I mean, I don't know if you have space, but at the top of the T shell, or on paper.
You should
Yeah.
float on new off.
Yeah, new off, maybe then. I mean, new base paper. Yeah. For the rest of you guys, just at the top of the T shell.
Yep.
Ready?
Here's what is going on in the round. We have a conceded role of the judge, which means that we have to evaluate. He concedes that representations matter. He tries to disregard his policy framing coverage. Still a question of whose representations are the worst in the round. He tries to make arguments against my topicality interpretation, but that cannot be an independent reason to vote me down if he has worse representations than I'm defending, which means that the judge in this round has to evaluate either A, who has the worst representations, or which layer comes preclusionary or is first in terms of analyzing whose representation is the worst one. Go to the topicality shell. Let's deal with his arguments to get rid of these. Extend the interpretation. The affirmative must defend that adolescents ought to have the right to autonomous medical choice in its entirety. To clarify, affirmative cannot defend a parametricized attitude that isolates a particular medical choice or category of adolescents. Because of the violation, he defends a plan text. Now is the framing issue. You literally say policymaking good. That this means that the entirety of the topicality shell is self-inflicted abuse. If you say policymaking is a good thing, there are obviously racist assumptions and everything to do. Cross-apply the argument I made before. You have cold conceded, which means that any reason you say the topicality shell is a bad thing or that it is inherently racist or repressive is because I was trying to conform to the parameters that you set up in the 1AR. Too bad you have also conceded my preferred egg interpretations argument that you set up parameters in the 1AR, you set up parameters in the AC, which inherently makes it harder for me to gate because I have to conform to them, which means that any type of self-inflicted abuse, do not let him make any 2AR framing on this issue because you have conceded preferred egg interpretation, which means that I have no 3NR, so I cannot analyze them. Otherwise, you have to intervene as a judge and insert your own analysis, which is inherently bad for debate, and you cannot do that if you want to try to find the best method of combating oppression, which means that non-uniques every single one of the arguments he tries to read against the topicality shell. Sure, I will not go for the Nebel arguments, but too bad you conceded the ground standard. Fairness is still probably relevant under the role of the judge. That's why in cross I tried to say you cannot boil it down to just one word saying whether the K comes first. Obviously, people go for arguments as to why the topicality controls the internal link to the critique. So let's go to the ground standard. Excited regardless of disclosure without the interpretation, abs conceptually a hyperspecific medical choice that leaves horrible ground from the egg. His abs the clearest example. The disadvantage garnered from the resolution are either completely eliminated or severely mitigated. If you want to talk about marginalized and oppressed bodies, but I cannot even have ground to talk about that issue, that is obviously the worst violation in terms of representation that you are talking about. He's going to say that I am not doing that anymore in the 1AR, but too bad you cannot sever from the representation you're talking about. If you're doing that, then that is the worst form of exclusion because you're just monopolizing debate strategy to try to get type of wins and not actually talk about the issue that you think is relevant. You have conceded that interp solves 100%. You could have ran a topical version of Affirmative that still had specific offense, solves 100% because if you had specific offense, I could still engage in the way you are talking about. You have conceded vote for fairness because debate is a competition that must be constrained by rules in order to have the potential for an object around fairness frames competing interpretations, because it frames with substance concepts are relevant and mechanism judged with substance is necessary for debate. You have conceded no reasonability on T, absent comparing each side's arguments. The judge would only be able to make a decision based on their familiarity with the topic. Hold for debate since this is different from each judge. So if you want to keep him to his representation, which is talking about policymaking, then you necessarily have to drop him. You have conceded the ASA point that false interpretation should be voted down so they are not disseminated. The purpose of topicality is to promote the best interpretation of the resolution. I understand that Nebel may be saying something that might be a bad representation. However, it is so vastly outweighed by the strength of link of my conceded ground arguments to your role of the ballot. That's the reason why it would be functionally rendered irrelevant. You have conceded the CSA point that even if you drop the argument, the AF loses. The argument that T says you should drop is the advocacy. Is incoherent as everyone's advocacy. Since it is assumed to be what grounds the entirety of your position. Doing away with it is getting rid of the most basic feature of affirming, meaning you lose. Now he's going to try to say that my emphasis on grammar is inherently racist. Too bad you link too. Obviously, if I try to say something that is incorrect grammatically or that any interpretation of the AF is not consistent with the conception of grammar that you use, you would obviously fault me for that reason, which means that you cannot say this is unique to one side. Rather, he's just trying to monopolize my strategy because of something that he inflicted upon his own self, which means that if you're going to look to the policymaking paradigm that he tries to sever away from, then that's the reason why you're going to vote in the topicality shell. But even then, the ground standard is an independent reason why you can vote for me in topicality because of that. But also, independent reason to vote for the topicality shell under his role of the ballot. Extend Galloway, topical fairness requirements are key to effective dialogue. Monopolizing strategy makes the discussion one-sided and exclusionary. Debates is all parties fair opportunity to voice their position. Anything fails denies one side a fair hearing. While teams have recently visited affirming the topic selection process is rigorous. Taking right of each topic is separate ones. On one side takes more underlines respect to the other involved in dialogue. Denies the other personhood. A pedagogy of debate is dialogue. Takes respect is fundamental. Desire to be fair is a fundamental condition of dialogue. Demands for equality of voice. Backed by months of preparation, critical thinking, not to be silenced. This is a voting issue. They destroy your ability to meaningfully evaluate the winner of the round based on who is the better debater, which is the purpose of the judge in terms of in finding out the best method to combat oppression. So you should reject arguments that prevent you from exercising your fundamental role. Now let's go to his specific arguments that he tries to make it against. Say, go to his Nimi. He says that you assume grammar is universal. Obviously, you assume the same conception that Nimi talks about. Obviously, grammar can be impressive in certain ways, but the fact that my representation or intention is not connected to the oppressive form that he is talking about is a reason. I can leverage the Rodel analysis here. It's a pretty good argument because he says because an action is determined by the causality in terms of representing yourself as the course of your action. If, for instance, if I flip on a light and a prowler outside by me flipping on the light comes and murders my family, my action can only be described as me flipping on the light. Same thing here. My action can only be described in terms of the good intentions I had in trying to conform to the role of the ballot and the specifications that he talks about. But it doesn't mean that my representations are inherently tied to the Nimi argument nor the Pullum argument, which means it necessarily delinks me from the entirety. So now he can lose there. But now let's go to the critique. You are conceding way too much framing. Remember, it's a representations analysis, which means it necessarily precludes the entirety of the argument. You have also conceded the argument against the Boehmer analysis that your argument is fundamentally flawed. You have conceded the U-link that trying to conceive of every other type of oppression, such as racism and other types of way, in terms of the trans body is uniquely bad. That is coming out of your extension of Green, and that you try to limit them to certain categories that you think are particularly relevant, which is the worst form of type of Western imperialist and colonial oppression, which means that this is the strongest, most conceded link to your representation analysis. This means I can leverage the entirety of his answers. Go to my juror analysis. You have conceded objective realities don't exist absent framings of them, which means the critique is obviously a prerequisite to understanding anything subjective that you talk about. You have conceded that you reject the abstract representation. You only isolate the link as talking about a state. Too bad you didn't understand the Degner analysis. It literally says adolescence varies considerably across cultures. It does not only have to do the state. The state may exercise in this way, but your conception of trying to have only allow for trans adolescents or those who are 14 to 18 years old is how you link into it, because other cultures assume a very different conception of adolescence that you do not talk about. Your link of emission arguments are horrible because they do not identify the problem that you are talking about. Go to the alternative. You literally say that you can absence into his alternative. Too bad it's a representation argument. You cannot use the representation that is inherently flawed because you have conceded the turn against yours. So if you try to do the permutation or the alternate of his app being an instance of my alternative, that is a bad thing because you have conceded a disadvantage which I cannot endorse. I have to instead use conscientization, which is a deep interrogation.
Okay. Can you tell me the U-link argument under Nimi?
Yeah. Well, there was. Are you talking about the U-link argument on Green or Nimi?
Nimi.
All right. So Nimi just says that you assume a conception of grammar is universal. In reading your debate case, you obviously do the same thing. If I came up here and just said things that were completely incomprehensible to you, you would obviously say he's not saying words, and obviously that would link into the universal conception of grammar that you say is a bad thing.
Did you implicate the ground standard back to the roll of the ballot?
Yes.
So after I told you, I asked you in CX, does T have any implication
Okay,
in the roll of the ballot?
let me
You
explain
told
why
me
your
no.
question is incoherent, right?
You told
There,
me
no,
it
listen,
didn't have
listen.
implication,
K
and
does
now it
come
does.
first. Every single argument in my top
I
count.
understand K comes first. I also
Yeah.
asked you, does T have an implication
Yeah,
in
and
the
I
roll of the
literally,
ballot?
I
And you
literally.
told me no.
Wait, what? I did say yes. I said we can do weighing,
Oh,
and then
we're checking.
topicality
We're
still
checking.
implicates the roll of the ballot.
All right.
Sure.
The order is going to go Naomi, the new off.
T. When we get to T, we'll talk about Galloway too, so have that ready. And then AC, K. Actually, better yet, make it quick. We'll go AC, K, Naomi, T. Okay.
Where are you starting on these? Okay.
We're gonna start on. We'll respond. It'll start at the top. The arguments on Green, and then extensions real quick. Okay. So, yeah. Is everyone ready? Okay. Off Green, you're conceding my argument that we don't have to only talk about trans pollution, we just have to have this discussion, come the card off the round. I just said that we have to have this discussion, not that it's the only pertinent form of discussion. To your weighing analysis that kill other forms of discussion also goes away. Then extend Carroll analysis that acts hormone treatment, self-trend depression. Then go to the alternative. I said the abstinence and alternative. Now I'm only the one doing discussion of systemic impacts. This means I'm linking on the representative layer in the alternative because I'm talking about how in the score they're currently marginalized. And you're also conceding the second no link under the K, specifically that I do not defend your conception of adolescence because I defend a new conception of adolescence where I can treat the current developmental model of adolescence, i.e. the one in which females are treated as more mature than the males, when I say that there's no gender binary and also the female entity is replaced with gender identity confirmation, whatever you want. Then extend Curry, we need a unit of critique and real world action. You do not have real world action, so it also takes out your K impacts. Now go to the Naomi off. Extend the Naomi card that they assume grammar is universal and the only proper grammar this excludes people are based merely on was not normal. Then extend Plumel, then non-AVA English. There are other dialects that are still English. The response to my no link argument, I could have been incompetent. This I link argument relinks you into it. This on the Naomi K, because you're saying that I could just stand up and read an incompetent incoherent case. This relinks you because there are other coherent forms of English. Your conception that only the white form of English is a coherent one just relinks you into the K. You could definitely read other forms of English. That's under the Pullman analysis. The second argument is this intent argument that I didn't intend to be form of oppression. This no links me from your K impact and no links me from your ground impact. If we just talk about intent, that means that because I wasn't trying to intentionally exclude your ground, this means that goes away. Or intent doesn't matter, in which case it definitely still links you into the K, even if your intention was not to do it. And third, this is a bad norm to set in debate specifically because we could just be an infinitely amount of oppressive and abusive and just say, well, that wasn't my intent, so it doesn't matter. So definitely a bad norm to set in debate. Now I'll go to the T-shell. First under the Galloway arguments, this is not topicality anymore because you're not going for Nebel. You're only going for the ground standards. This just effectively becomes a theory shell. You're saying your interpretation of how I prescribe a word in the activity is like bad, but this isn't a T-shell anymore, so Galloway goes away. Also second under Galloway, it's only key to effective dialogue if it's a precondition to effective dialogue. Your ground standard is not necessarily that you had no ability to engage in the round at all. It's just that it would have had better discussion if we had the ability to engage in the round. But this isn't necessarily a precondition to all forms of perfect discussion. This is just a precondition to maybe a better form of discussion. But if we constantly critique discussion without actually having a discussion, then we're just going to kill any possible solutions to oppression. So it's definitely better to have a flawed discussion than constantly critique discussion with topicality and skirt the issue. Topicality is definitely not directly having engagement in the discussion. Now go to his ground standard. First, this is bullshit. You told me in CX specifically that you weren't going to implicate T back to the roll about, or that roll about came first. Now you're linking your T offense into the roll about. I was very specific on this issue when I said I didn't want you to make new applications in the next speech. You even asked me, why do you keep asking about T? I said because you might do something tricky exactly like this. But also second, you say I kill your ability to engage, but you still definitely had the ability to engage because I disclosed this intro prior to the round. This isn't a new argument because you're implicating it back to the roll about. It's definitely allowed me to make new analysis in the next speech. You said you don't have a 3 end to respond, but since you implicated this argument in the 2 end, I definitely get responses since it was disclosed, and I've been running it the entire tournament. You definitely have the ability to engagement, which mitigates a lot of the abuse there. And second, you're conceding the Curry analysis. We need to deal with real-world solutions. Since you're implicating about this to the world about, Curry also excludes your ground standard because you're not implicating a real-world solution to this form of oppression. Just skirting discourse. Good round. Can you delete my stuff? I'll delete yours.
Yeah.
1 and C, don't save. Lexar, 2 and quarters, 2 in round 3, move to trash. Oh, to trash. Trash can, empty, empty.
Okay, I didn't save anything on my computer.
Alright, cool. That one didn't ask you to save. Are you sure you didn't save the anything?
I mean, you can check my computer. I don't have anything.
No, I trust you. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I don't know why. Oh, because it wasn't modified.
Oh, I see. Let me get some water.
this has been fixed now. You had a Congress ballot for a few minutes. We're not quite sure why.
Too bad you already filled it in.
Someone's being pissed. I guess I'll use the caucus rules to have people to feel that. It's not like the only rules I have, right? Yeah. Ballot says too. There's not much stuff stacked there.
What happened? I chalked it on to a bunch of What? It came down to theory.
There's some good moves there.
Big surprise. I like my move that was like the second response to the he takes out his carriage and stuff. Because he was like, he's not a problem. He can just think that. It's just a
Well, the real problem I mean, you definitely not forced to do this one. And there's no reason for it. You could try to a few seconds too. So
Yeah, he could have done like 4 arguments instead of 8. Because honestly, I think that like a lot of judges are very compelled by the way to do it. So confused. Like obviously you can't check all. Like so that's what I did in next week. I did like 8 reasons constructive data and the judges were like, yeah, this is constructive.
Well, I would. If you had gone for that, you cut that off. He did a very smart move,
My counter
Sorry,
is
which part do you know?
He agreed when I agreed.
What is it? Yeah. You know, I use
next to that. The shell is about maybe I did connect it right down there. No, I'm connected to a wall stack, no Wi-Fi sense. And I'm on lock.
No way. Oh, well, he says he wants to do that. No, it's fine. No, I did.
Where you have and you still have to win your injury. There's no way you can do that.
Well, so like, yeah, I mean, You should reload it. Wait, copy and paste the
Wait, we have one.
the RT stuff.
It was a good round.
I think you'll leave that in there.
Wait, no, I think that this should go here until you guys decided it, and then this will let it flow.
Who wants to announce it?
You should. It's on your
Well, congratulations on a fine performance to two excellent individuals. It is a 3-0 for the affirmative.
I'll go first. I end up thinking in this debate that the representations forwarded by the negative in the Niebel evidence are racist and exclusive to debaters. And that's the only thing that matters in this debate. I'm definitely not voting on any of the fairness, skew, kind of judge role type impacts because those don't link to the roll of the ballot, and that's all that matters in the debate conceded by the neg and cross-ex of the 1NC and the 1AR. So it's only a question of whether ground is a better internal link to the roll of the ballot or the NEMI K is. I'm kind of skeptical of the ground arguments first off because I think that it's a new impact in the 2 and R, and I flow cross-ex, and I think you said explicitly that the K comes before T. You even said I'll concede that the K comes before T. I'm open to you being a little ambiguous and doing some kind of tricky stuff, but I think when you say something comes first, I think that kind of what in my mind that means and what the affirmative says that means is that it comes absolutely prior, that there's no way to look at anything except that in the debate. So the representations are all that matter, and so I'm skeptical of this from the start, but I end up looking at the impacts anyway. I think the F has good mitigation on ground because there's only exclusion in the way that Galloway says if there's really nothing to say against the F or there's a real positive strategies, and I think the F could do a lot better job of proving what negative engagement would look like and what are some kind of examples, but the neg on the flip side doesn't really do a good job of saying what is the ground that you lost that you could not say against the F. So I'm not going to hold either side to that sort of burden. I think there is good mitigation there, though. Next is I don't think it really links to the roll of ballot. I agree with the 2AR that this theory argument does not create solutions for oppression, so I don't think the link is particularly strong. And then the last thing is strength of link analysis in terms of what is dropped or not. I don't think you really can test the NEMI card or its impact. In the 2 and R, you go for U-link arguments, and ground kind of outweighs, but given that it's virtually dropped in this debate, I think it probably outweighs on strength of link. The last argument that gives me some pause in this debate is whether the policy making means that it is self-inflicted. But I think this is answered by the responses to ground because if the F is debatable, then you didn't have to run T. It's not self-inflicted. But second, I think that the link is specific to stuff that the neg said. It's not like a theory debate where we're trying to figure out who was where is the locus of abuse, who is responsible for it. The roll of the ballot or the representations arguments don't care about who is responsible. They care about were your representations good in this debate or not. And I think that the way that the Niebel arguments were forwarded in this debate are profoundly racist and exclusive of other dialects and debaters who want to engage the resolution in different ways.
So I largely agree with Bob. So I'll just speak to a couple other areas. So I think the move that you're making, the extrapolation of Rodel, I think in addition to the problems that Bob already outlined, another problem though is that there's absolutely no argument being made as to why the parameters outlined in the AC would necessitate this conception of language. And that is key for you to be able to say that the parameters themselves and your attempt to conform with them speaks to your intention in the Speech Act. the second issue is that, so the negatives 2AR response to this, which is, look, even if you're buying this, this would function to delink the app from the K as well. Obviously that is new in the 2, but that is response to something going on in the 2 and R. There is nothing in your move at the top of the 2 and R that would preclude this being a way of just delinking both of you from the criticisms. Which, if that happens, you're in a really, really bad position in the round. I think so I think that you are, so on the question of T versus K, so the first thing is, I think you're wrong. He's clearly giving an answer, at least as far as I remember, we can look at the video, that T is going to have an impact under the roll of the ballot. I agree with Bob that the ground arguments are very poorly impacted back to that roll of the ballot. The answer he's giving, though, when he's saying K comes before T, is not, so your question doesn't push him to give a nuanced explanation here, and I never took him to be saying that the category of a critical argument precedes the category of topicality arguments under the roll of ballot, rather that it is just the particular arguments he's making on each of those flows that are being prioritized. I also don't think that particularly matters because you're not generating offense off of his K, you're generating offense off of the T and making your own K. But I think that the F is way ahead on the K debate. So first thing is that you're letting him get away with just like these very, in my opinion, kind of crappy extrapolations from the F, where he's like, look, there's a fluid conception of adolescence going on in the F because I've treated gender as fluid. Why the hell does treating gender as fluid speak to the fluidity of adolescence? Second, why does treating adolescence as fluid make it non-cultural as a conception? These are the things that you need to be, I think, doing a lot more work on. And I think one place that speaks to a need to change the strategy they want to see is that there's so little work done in specifying the parts of the app and extrapolating links from that. The only thing you say, for instance, is like, and he starts pushing in sex, and then you just kind of start making stuff up. Like you're like, you start talking about like adolescence and like 14 to 18 or whatever you said. Well, you're not specifying any part of the app that conceptualize adolescence that way, and I searched for various things that I couldn't find anything. So at the least I feel like I would have to be doing way too much work for you to generate a link off the K. The only other argument that I think is an independent criticism of the representation of the app is the
Green 2.
I guess that was, I think that's the only thing we can send it to him. So the extrapolation of green 2, So I think you're not doing near enough to explain why he is saying that all oppression has to be filtered through a frame of trans identity. I think it was pretty clear to me in the AC and certainly in later speeches that was not the case, though that could be one option for how you could avoid re-entrenching the cisgender binary, but it was not exclusive. So the only offense left on the representation level is the AFs off of the K he reads. If all of the Ks go away, then the AF is the only one with any semblance of offense left off of the K space. So
yeah, I didn't mention the intention type stuff. I thought that was a poor move by the 2 and R because I think it's really easy for the AF to get out of most of your offense on intentions. So I end up thinking I'm not gonna vote on only what the intentions were because that would eviscerate everything that happened in the debate. And I agree with the 2AR that that would allow us to do really bad stuff and just say, oh, we meant well. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I'll just make comments on some of the issues I disagree or the comments. I thought that the answer on theory with the the response for the reason why theory could come first. I think that it was said that the K comes before fairness, but I think that the argument he makes that says it could have an implication, I think that is in cross-ex, and his argument is that T would constrain the links of the K, and I think that's a pretty good argument, because you wouldn't get the links of the K if it wasn't topical in the first place. But I think that the answer that this is now a theory shell since you lost any of the text arguments would mean that it seems like it's just an independent theory argument, not really a text argument that constrains links. So although that's another reason that the theory debate goes away. I thought that on the rebar stuff it was pretty clear I wasn't really sure if I thought Rodel was like too new to really evaluate, or if it was a response to an NR argument. But it seems like maybe you should have had to make it a cross application after Rodel, like in the 1AR.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it takes out too much of the entire debate, anyways, if you evaluate it. Also, conceding so much of rebar is just like a terrible move, because this is like you say that like it's outweighed. Even if your grammar stuff is bad, it's outweighed by the ground stuff. But that means that you need to be actually challenging the rebar card, right? You need to be interacting with that. And then when it gets to the case debate, if I don't just vote off of the rebar stuff, there is the Curry stuff at the end of the AC that goes unresponded to in the NR. That you needed to have a policy and you don't. So I think that if it gets to that debate, it's just immediately over. The one question I had too, though, was in terms of the K, responding to the K.
Mm-hmm.
You made an argument about like link of omissions don't matter at all, and it was conceded, and you did extend it to 2AR.
Yeah.
I thought that you should have just extended that.
I think the 2NR said something. I think you just said your argument on link of omission is incoherent or something like that. So it wasn't
There was
exactly
lip service
conceded,
paid.
but
There's no argument, you know.
yeah. Well, I also just make a perm. I don't know.
I don't know. I thought I just didn't want to spend too much time on it.
Yeah, but
It makes sense to make perms. You're right.
just make a perm.
I had one question. So in the 1N, I had an argument that said, prefer negative interpretations. He textures the round, sets the parameters, etc. And then I make like one argument under his policymaking stuff as to like T is key to policymaking, just because it allows us to like test definitions, etc. And then I go for that as a reason why it matters most under his role in the ballot. Presumably, it's like speaking to Curry, and he says real world, so then T would link best to that, right?
But if you're not going for any of the grammar arguments or the arguments about text, like he says, when it's just an issue of ground, then it no longer gets that, right? Because it's not the claim that like a comma changes the law, because we're not evaluating grammar issues anymore. It's just a question of grammar.
But if the ground standard in the Galloway stuff is articulated in terms of like effective dialogue and just like not monopolizing strategy and making sure we can find the best method or whatever, then wouldn't it still sort of link to all the impacts that I'm claiming?
Part of this goes back to what Bob said when he was talking about this initially, which is it's not at all clear what ground you're specifically losing, and how that would impact dialogue at all, at least to me.
Okay.
I have two things to say about that. First is, I didn't see your 2NR argument as an extension of that argument. I completely forgot that was there until you just mentioned it. So if you wanted me to look at stuff that was on case, you needed to be like, this was the number 4 on the Connolly evidence. It was conceded it has its impact. And, part of that is my bad for not, seeing or remembering that. But the second thing is I think that we don't have to vote on the policy making stuff. I think that all of us think that the 1ARK is often completely independent of policy making. So yeah, T is important if we care about policy making, but in this debate we can vote that your reps were bad and it doesn't matter.
We can still vote on